Hey guys! Tonight we begin in a dim attic tucked into the Swiss countryside. Dust motes dancing lazily in golden slants of evening light. You're about 10 years old. Alone. Sitting cross-legged on the wooden floor. Around you are little figurines you've carved yourself, strange ones. Oddly shaped. Like ancient idols whose meanings you can't quite explain. You speak to them. Sometimes silently. Sometimes aloud. It's your secret ritual. You've buried one in the garden and placed a tiny stone on top as a shrine. You don't know why it matters, but it does. You're Carl Jung. And you're already haunted. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from. And what time it is in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your father is a pastor. He speaks often of God, but with a dullness that makes you uneasy. You notice he avoids certain questions, big ones. You suspect he's hiding doubt. And the fear in his voice makes you want to run in the other direction. You don't yet know what theology is. But already you've begun distrusting easy answers. School, meanwhile, is a mess. You black out once during a lesson. Collapse to the floor. Doctors call it fainting. But you know better. Something inside of you shut down to avoid what you were being told. It's not boredom, it's protest. Later in life, you'll call this a creative illness. At the time, though, it just feels like confusion wrapped in silence. You spend most of your youth alone. Not out of sadness. Really, more like necessity. Other kids are playing, you're walking along the Rhine River wondering about the ancient Romans who once stood where you're standing. You read Latin texts for fun. You begin journaling. At night, your dreams burst with intensity, gods, snakes, temples, unfamiliar symbols. They wake you up. Sometimes you cry. Sometimes you scribble them down before breakfast. One mainstream historical fact: Carl Jung was born in 1875 in Keswil, Switzerland, and grew up in the village of Basel. His early interest in philosophy and ancient history was unusually strong, even for a precocious child. But here's a quirky tidbit: Jung believed his carved figurines, particularly the one he buried in the garden, represented something deeply spiritual. He called it his mannequin. And he returned to it often as a child, whispering secrets and drawing comfort from its presence. He later identified this as his first personal ritual, independent of religion. Historians still argue whether these early mystical experiences were signs of a fertile imagination, signs of latent mental illness, or flashes of rare psychological insight. Jung would say, why not all three? You might also find it amusing that your classmates thought you were a bit of a weirdo, which is understandable. You'd show up to class, stare at people a little too long, and write poems about alchemy in your spare time. Teachers didn't quite know what to do with you. One called you a dreamy boy who wandered through fog. And yet, you begin to feel something profound. Your inner world is real. More real than lectures or chores or church sermons. You sense there's something just behind the veil of reality, something intelligent, something vast. And you want to understand it. So you retreat further. The attic becomes your laboratory. Dreams become data. Silence becomes sacred. And then, one night, you dream of a massive phallus emerging from under the cathedral. It terrifies you, and fascinates you. Years later, you'll recall it as a foundational moment in realizing that the unconscious speaks in symbols, not words. And often, the unconscious is far less polite than society. You begin to journal more. You invent your own system of signs and symbols. You experiment with automatic writing. You argue with yourself in long, handwritten monologues. No. This doesn't mean you're going crazy, it means you're building a relationship with your inner world. And someday, the world will call it analytical psychology. But that's still years away. For now, you're just a peculiar Swiss boy in an attic. carving sacred shapes into wood, whispering secrets to stone figurines, and trying to understand why no one else seems to see what you see. You're 25 now, standing at the doorway of a tidy Viennese apartment that smells faintly of pipe smoke and leather-bound books. Inside waits a man with the beard of a prophet and the eyes of someone who's either figured it all out or gone slightly mad from trying. His name is Sigmund Freud. He is, by all accounts, the king of the unconscious, at least in Vienna. You step in, feeling like you've just entered the most important room of your career. You're a bit nervous, but also curious. Almost like meeting an estranged uncle whose letters you've studied for years. What happens next? 13 hours. That's how long the two of you talk the first time. Non-stop. No breaks. Just two minds, bouncing off each other like flint and steel. You both walk away lit up. Freud says you're the heir to his throne. You say he's cracked open a door you didn't know how to unlock. For a while, it's a romance of mythical proportions. He calls you my adopted eldest son. You call him the father of psychoanalysis. You both ignore how ironic those labels will soon become. You travel together, write papers, cover books. You even appear on lecture tours like a psychological rock band. But it's not all cigar smoke and mutual admiration. Freud, it turns out, has a favorite lens: sex. You, on the other hand, keep seeing gods and myths and patterns older than any one culture. You start to question whether everything in the psyche really reduces to libido. You mention dreams that seem spiritual. He frowns. You reference the collective unconscious. He stiffens. One mainstream historical fact: in 1907, Freud and Jung met for the first time. And Freud quickly saw Jung as his intellectual successor, hoping to bridge psychoanalysis with broader cultural acceptance through Jung's more mainstream image. But here's the quirky tidbit: Freud once fainted during a heated discussion with Jung about ancient religious symbolism. Jung claimed it was no accident, calling it a psychogenic reaction, a fancy way of saying, "I think your unconscious just quit on you mid-argument." Historians still argue whether Freud's trust in Jung was ever genuine or just strategic. Freud, a Jewish intellectual in anti-Semitic Europe, may have chosen Jung, a Protestant, Swiss-born doctor, as his Aryan front man to make psychoanalysis more socially palatable. Was it admiration, or calculated branding? Either way, the tension grows. You feel boxed in. Freud demands loyalty. You want freedom. You believe the mind isn't just shaped by childhood or sexual repression, it's shaped by myth, spirit, history, and shadow. Freud says, you're veering into mysticism. You say, you're afraid of the unknown. Eventually, it all snaps. In 1912, you publish Psychology of the Unconscious, which reads like a very polite but unmistakable breakup letter. Freud responds with a cold shoulder and a permanent frown. You never speak again. But let's be honest, you knew it was coming. The dream you had months earlier warned you. In it, you walk through a massive house filled with ancient rooms buried beneath modern floors. You realize your psyche isn't Freud's tidy apartment, it's a labyrinth. And maybe Freud wasn't the map. Maybe he was just the welcome mat. The split is brutal. You lose friends. You lose status. People call you a traitor. Freud's disciples close ranks. But something deeper awakens in you, something ancient. You stop trying to fit in. Instead, you go inward. You start having visions. Disturbing ones. You see floods covering Europe. You see a sea of blood. You hear voices that don't feel like yours. Hey guys, tonight we begin in a dramatic tucked into the Swiss countryside. For now, dust motes dancing lazily in the golden slants of evening light. You're about 10 years old. You're
alone,
not whispering to
sitting
a figurine
cross-legged
in
on
the
the
attic.
wooden floor.
This time,
around you are
you're
little
whispering
figurines
to
you've carved yourself,
and something's
strange
whispering
ones,
back. You
oddly
wake up
shaped,
before dawn now,
like ancient
not
idols whose
because you're
meanings you
rested,
can't quite
far from
explain,
it, but because
you
your
speak
dreams
to
won't
them.
let you sleep.
Sometimes
You're
silently,
in your late 30s,
sometimes aloud.
freshly severed from
It's your
Freud,
secret ritual.
and it feels like
You've
you've
buried one in the
detonated your
garden and
entire
placed a
professional
tiny
life.
stone on top
Your
as a shrine.
friends,
You don't
gone.
know why it
Your
matters,
status,
but it does.
slipping.
You're Carl
Your
Jung,
sense of purpose,
and you're already
shattered
haunted.
like a mirror.
So,
and you're
before you
holding
get
the shards
comfortable,
bare-handed.
take
It's
a moment to like the video
1913,
and subscribe,
and your mind
but
is no
only if
longer
you
a
genuinely
quiet
enjoy
attic.
what I do
It's a
here.
carnival
Let
of
me know
voices,
where you're watching
visions,
from, and what time
creatures
it is
you
in
can't
your part of the
explain.
world.
You begin
Now,
to worry
dim the
privately.
lights.
Of
Maybe
course,
turn on the
that you're
fan for that
losing your
soft
grip.
background
But
hum.
instead of
And
retreating
let's
or
ease into
medicating
tonight's
the chaos,
journey together.
you
Your
do
father
something
is a pastor.
strange.
He
You lean
speaks
in
often of
each
God,
day.
but with a
After
dullness
tending to
that
your
makes you
patients and
uneasy.
family,
You
you
notice
sit
he
at your
avoids
desk and
certain
deliberately
questions,
descend.
big ones.
Eyes closed,
You suspect
breath
he's
slow.
hiding doubt,
You allow your
and the fear
consciousness
in
to
his
sink,
voice makes
like
you
diving
want to run in the other
underwater to meet
direction.
whatever
You
waits
don't
below.
yet know what
It's not
theology is,
daydreaming,
but already
it's not
you've begun
madness.
distrusting easy
It's
answers.
active
School,
imagination.
meanwhile,
You write down
is a
everything.
mess.
Sketch
You black
it,
out once
color
during a
it,
lesson,
layer it in
collapse to the
symbolism,
floor.
mythology,
Doctors call it
and
fainting,
fragments of
but you
ancient
know
lore.
better.
And then
Something
you bind
inside
it all
of you
into a
shut
crimson
down to
leather
avoid what
volume
you
with
were
thick,
being told.
creamy pages.
It's not boredom,
You call
it's
it the Red
protest.
Book. No one
Later
sees
in
it.
life,
Not
you'll
for
call this a
decades.
creative illness.
It's your secret scripture.
At the time,
your psychological
though, it
gospel
just
written
feels
in
like
paint
confusion
and metaphor.
wrapped in
One
silence.
mainstream
You spend
historical
most
fact
of your youth
between
alone,
1913
not out
and
of sadness.
1917.
Really,
Carl
more
Jung
like necessity.
experienced what he
Other
later
kids
called
are
a
playing,
confrontation
you're
with
walking
the
along the
unconscious,
Rhine River wondering
during
about
which
the
he
ancient
recorded a
Romans
torrent
who
of
once
dreamlike
stood where you're
visions that
standing.
formed the
You
foundation
read
of
Latin
much of his
texts
later
for fun.
work.
You
The Red
begin
Book,
journaling.
unpublished
At night,
until
your dreams
2009,
burst with intensity.
became a legendary
Gods,
document
snakes,
in psychology.
temples,
Now here's the quirky
unfamiliar
bit. Jung
symbols.
didn't just write
They
about
wake you up.
archetypes. He
Sometimes
met them.
you cry.
One of the most recurring
Sometimes
figures
you
in his
scribble
inner
them down
voyages
before
was an old
breakfast.
man named
One mainstream
Philemon,
historical
who had
fact:
the wings
Carl
of a
Jung was
kingfisher
born
and
in
the wisdom of an
1875 in
oracle.
Keswick,
Jung genuinely believed
Switzerland,
Philemon
and grew
was a
up in the
separate
village of
intelligence
Basel.
within the
His
psyche,
early interest
not
in
merely a
philosophy
figment
and
of
ancient
imagination.
history was unusually
Historians
strong,
still argue
even
whether
for a
this
precocious
period was a
child.
breakdown,
But here's a
a
quirky
mystical
tidbit.
awakening,
Jung believed
or
his
both.
carved
Was
figurines,
Jung documenting
particularly the one he
psychological
buried in the
discovery,
garden,
or was he
represented
journaling a
something
4-year
deeply
hallucination
spiritual.
with
He
impeccable
called it his
calligraphy?
mannequin, and he returned
However,
to it often
aren't
as a
worried
child,
about labels.
whispering
You're
secrets
living
and
it.
drawing comfort
In one
from its
vision,
presence.
you're walking
He later
through a desolate
identified this as
landscape,
his first
and a
personal
young girl
ritual,
gives you a stone
independent
egg.
of religion.
It opens,
Historians
and
still
inside is a
argue
glowing
whether these
seed.
early
In
mystical
another, you
experiences
meet
were
a
signs
serpent
of a
and a bird
fertile
who spiral into
imagination,
each other like
signs
DNA
of latent
strands.
mental illness,
Long before
or
DNA
flashes
was
of
even
rare
discovered.
psychological
Your wife, Emma,
insight.
to her
Jung would
eternal
say,
credit,
why not all
doesn't
three?
leave.
You might
She
also find
watches,
it amusing that your
quietly
classmates
worried,
thought you
but
were a bit
supports
of a
you
weirdo,
nonetheless,
which is
even when you
understandable.
start speaking to
You'd show up
invisible
to
sages
class,
and painting
stare at
cosmic
people a little
mandalas on
too
the living
long,
room floor.
and write poems
She
about
calls this
alchemy in your
creative
spare
madness.
time. Teachers
You call it
didn't
your
quite
night
know
sea
what to do
journey.
with you.
You stop
One
going to
called you a
lectures.
dreamy boy
You
who
cancel
wandered through
most
fog,
appointments.
and yet,
You
you
tend
begin to
your
feel
garden.
something.
You chop wood. You build a tower with your own hands by the shores of Lake Zurich. No electricity, no
Ở vlog
plumbing,
này em sẽ trải
just
nghiệm những món ăn
stone,
siêu phẩm trên bàn
fire,
cho tới ăn
and
cơm chan nước lã
solitude.
ghém ớt.
You call
Thì
it
chúng ta sẽ
bowling
có cơm này,
there. You carve
cả
Latin
nước này,
inscriptions
với
into
cả
the walls
với
and
quả
talk
ớt.
with the
Trong đó tình
wind.
người sẽ thấm
You
đẫm vào
write
từng hạt
passages
cơm.
like,
Hay là đi
I
xin
must
ăn nhưng
learn
bị
that
từ
the dregs
chối.
of my thought, my dreams,
Không có
are
bất
the
cứ thứ gì
speech
à?
of the soul.
Cái gì
You
cũng được.
are, in
Cứ
effect,
cho em một miếng.
translating the language of the unconscious into something the waking
Đây, đổ
mind
xe
can
xong rồi
comprehend.
xăng vãi hết cả ra
Occasionally,
đường này này.
you host
Tất cả là đều
visitors,
nhờ thằng bạn thân
students,
khắm bựa này.
Các bác
colleagues,
ơi, em vừa
even
mới
the
ngủ
odd
dậy thì
curious
nhận được một thử
stranger.
thách của thằng
But
bạn.
they don't see everything.
Năm nay ta
They
mới xem
see
một
the
cái nick trên
professor,
mạng rất thú
the
vị ấy.
doctor, the
Bây giờ
theorist,
mày
not
hay
the
đi
traveler
bạn ta
who's
đổ
been
hè trong vòng
negotiating
24
treaties
giờ,
with
mỗi giờ
gods
phải
and
check in một
shadows
bạn
over
khác
his
nhau
morning coffee.
và phải
And
vào trong
here's the
bản đó xin
kicker,
ăn.
you're not
Nhưng
doing
với
this
điều kiện
just
là
for
một hộp
yourself.
đồ uống đó
You believe everyone has this potential to explore the depths, to meet their inner characters, to build a dialogue between ego and soul. Most people just don't listen, or they're too scared to look, but you're all in, and so, night after night, you return to your ed book, your symbolic theater, and the quiet lake. There's no applause, no Freud, no clinic, Just you, and the echo of something timeless speaking through you. The descent nearly breaks you. But from that descent, something new begins to rise. You're ankle-deep in myth now. Not metaphorically, literally. You're walking through the collective unconscious. And it's crowded. There's a great mother stirring a cauldron. A hero sharpening his sword. A wise old man with cloudy eyes muttering riddles about time. These aren't fantasies, they're archetypes. And they've been living rent-free in the human psyche since we first painted bison on cave walls. You begin to map them, like a cartographer of the soul. You sketch the hero's journey, not the Hollywood version with explosions, but the internal one, the call, the trials, the abyss, the transformation. You explain how the anima, the feminine within men, and the animus, the masculine within women, act as bridges between our conscious mind and the deep layers of the unconscious. You describe the self, not the ego, but the totality of who we are, as the ultimate destination. One mainstream historical fact: Carl Jung introduced the concept of archetypes as universal, inherited symbols that reside in what he called the collective unconscious. He believed these patterns show up across cultures, religions, and stories, not by coincidence, but because they're baked into the architecture of the human mind. You start seeing these patterns everywhere. The fairy tales of Germany, full of them. The gods of Egypt, archetypes in elaborate costumes. Even modern dreams, scrawled on notepads by nervous patients. Repeat the same motifs, descending staircases, devouring beasts, golden circles, and reunions with long-lost parents. It's uncanny. A quirky tidbit: Jung once suggested that flying saucers were modern expressions of the mandala, circular symbols representing the self. He wasn't saying aliens were real, though he didn't rule it out. He was saying that human psyches, under stress, might invent new archetypes for an anxious age. Historians still argue whether Jung's archetypes are real structures or poetic metaphors. Do these figures actually live in some shared psychic space, or are they just convenient storytelling tools? Jung never insisted on a rigid answer. Both. He might have said, while staring thoughtfully into a fire, you take this work seriously, perhaps too seriously. At parties, when someone mentions Cinderella, you launch into a full analysis of the lost feminine and the slipper as a symbol of individuation. Small talk becomes deep talk in under 2 minutes. Invitations begin to dwindle. Still, your tower at bowling and becomes your sanctuary for this work. You sculpt figures into stone. You paint mythic scenes on the walls, and you let the wind off Lake Zurich whisper forgotten tales through the windows. Each carving is a conversation with the unconscious. Each motif a reminder that we are never just ourselves, we are carrying the dreams of ancestors. And you see danger too. People identify too strongly with one archetype and get stuck. A man sees himself only as the hero, and becomes arrogant. A woman identifies too fully with the mother, and forgets her own needs. Your goal isn't to become one archetype, it's to integrate them all. To find balance between their competing forces. You call this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming your truest self. Not a perfect person, but a whole one. You also begin to notice something peculiar. When patients recognize an archetype within themselves, something shifts. It's not therapy in the modern sense, it's mythic recognition. They weep, they sigh, they laugh in shock. It's as if their story suddenly fits into something ancient, vast, and meaningful. And isn't that what we're all quietly craving? A sense that our suffering has context. That our lives are not random jumbles but chapters in an age-old narrative. That our pain echoes the pain of Prometheus, of Persephone, of the wandering fool. You write this all down. Of course. Psychological types. Symbols of transformation. The archetypes and the collective unconscious. People read them, puzzled but intrigued. Some nod knowingly. Others scratch their heads. A few call you a mystic. Or worse, a poet. You smile at that. You've been called worse. As night falls again over Bowlingham, you step outside your tower. The stars wheel overhead, ancient and silent. Somewhere in the forest, an owl hoots. In your hand is a stone, smooth, heavy, cold. You roll it between your fingers and feel, not just rock, but memory, a symbol, a presence. You're not alone out here. You never were. You're floating now, drifting through dreams, through misty forests of the mind where everything feels just a little too symbolic to be random. You've built the theory, mapped the archetypes, drawn the diagrams. But there's still something whispering behind the curtain of sleep. Something older than myth. Something divine. You begin to take dreams more seriously than most people take taxes. Your patients arrive, complaining of anxiety, of shame, of inexplicable sadness, and you ask them about their dreams. Not just the plot, but the texture. Was it cold? Were there colors? Did the dog speak French? Because to you, dreams are the psyche's nightly telegrams. They're how the unconscious communicates. When words have failed during the day. Not random. Not noise. Purposeful. If cryptic. Each image a clue. Each symbol a code. One mainstream historical fact: Jung developed a method of dream interpretation distinct from Freud's. While Freud saw dreams as veiled wish fulfillment rooted in repressed sexuality, Jung believed they were direct expressions of the unconscious and could offer guidance toward psychological wholeness. You sit beside patients and dive into their nocturnal voyages. A woman dreams of drowning in green water. You ask, what does green mean to you? A man dreams of losing his shoes in a golden desert. You ask, what does it feel like? Walking barefoot. You never tell them what the dream means. That would be too easy. Too Freud. Instead, you help them build a bridge between waking and dreaming, what you call the transcendent function. The goal isn't to decode the dream like a crossword, it's to engage it in dialogue. You also dream. Of course. Constantly. Your notebooks are a museum of inner theater, ruined cities, laughing skeletons, dragons with flowers in their mouths. Sometimes, dead people visit. Once, you dream of being dissected by Egyptian priests while your soul watches from the ceiling. Another time, your liver turns into a luminous beetle that recites poetry. It's hard to find a support group for that. Here's a quirky tidbit: Jung claimed to communicate with the spirit of a long-dead philosopher named Basilides. He didn't mean this metaphorically. He really believed some dreams opened portals to ancient wisdom, not just psychological, but metaphysical. Historians still argue whether Jung's dream work was science, spirituality, or something in between. Was he opening new frontiers of the psyche? Or just a really articulate insomniac with too much time on his hands? But you don't care what they say. You build your own cosmology. You propose that God isn't out there but also in here as an archetype, an image arising from the deep unconscious. You suggest that Christ represents the self, that Satan might symbolize the shadow, that ancient alchemists were really proto-psychologists, projecting the inner transformation of the soul onto bubbling flasks and leaden scrolls. You say things like, the gods are within us. Some people love you for it. Others say you've gone full wizard. You shrug. More and more, you see life as a series of encounters between the ego and something greater. You call this the numinous, the raw, electrifying sense that there's more to this moment than meets the eye. It's what people feel during religious ecstasy, or standing at the edge of a cliff, or while dreaming of something they've never seen but deeply recognize. And sometimes, these moments aren't beautiful, they're terrifying. That's the price of depth. The unconscious doesn't wear deodorant. It's sweaty, primal, strange. But it's yours. You walk the line between science and mysticism like a tightrope artist with no net. To skeptics, you're a half-baked prophet. To spiritual seekers, you're a reluctant saint. To your kids, you're just the guy who built a stone tower and talks to birds. Speaking of birds, one day while pondering a particularly stubborn patient case, A scarab beetle taps against your window. Not just any beetle, a scarab. Sacred in ancient Egypt. Symbol of rebirth. And the patient had just dreamed of a golden scarab. You calmly collect the insect. Show it to her. And her resistance cracks like glass. She cries. You say nothing. Later. You call this synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that defy cause and effect. But that's a story for another night. For now, you're still adrift in the dreamscape. Lantern in hand. Listening for the next whisper from the deep. The forest is darker now. And you've stopped trying to light it up. Instead, you let your eyes adjust. And there, just beyond the edge of your conscious vision, you finally see it, the shadow. It's not a monster. Not exactly. It's you. Or rather, everything you've rejected about yourself, the anger you pretend you don't feel, the envy you mock in others, the desires you shame into silence. It's your personal boogeyman, but also your buried gold. You don't kill it. You invite it to tea, because now you understand that ignoring the shadow makes it stronger. The more you deny it, the more it rules you from behind the curtain. You've seen this firsthand, respectable men who suddenly explode in rage. Saints who fall into scandal. Nice women who dream of murder. One mainstream historical fact: Jung introduced the concept of the shadow as the unconscious part of the personality that the ego refuses to identify with. He argued that integrating the shadow, acknowledging and accepting it, was crucial to psychological wholeness. You begin to help others meet theirs. A kind professor dreams of hitting his wife with a chair. You don't panic. You ask why he thinks the dream showed him that image. He weeps. I wanted to hurt her, but only because I felt so helpless. You nod. Welcome to the shadow. And here's a quirky tidbit: Jung once claimed he encountered his own shadow on a walk. It appeared as a large, silent figure beside him, cloaked and heavy-footed. He didn't run. He offered it a cigar. It declined, rude, but fair. Historians still argue whether the shadow is a real structure or just a poetic way to describe suppressed emotion. But you've seen the pattern: what we repress doesn't disappear, it waits. And when it re-emerges, it wears a mask. Sometimes it looks like addiction. Sometimes like sabotage. Sometimes like a politician. You also notice, modern society really hates the shadow. It prefers clean Instagram filters, curated identities, shiny optimism. But you believe in the value of rot, compost, decay. You think, maybe the soul needs fertilizer, too. And when people push back, you remind them gently, the shadow isn't evil. It's just unloved. This leads to a problem, though. People start liking their shadows a little too much. They weaponize the idea. This is just my shadow. Someone says after ghosting a friend or yelling at their kid. You frown. No. That's just being a jerk. Integration isn't indulgence. It's responsibility. To meet your shadow is not to become it, it's to make peace with it. So it doesn't control you from behind the scenes. You write essays, books, lectures, trying to explain this delicate dance. And then, in one particularly lucid dream, you see a mirror in a desert. You approach. Your reflection steps out, looks at you,
guys,
and says,
tonight we begin in a dramatic tucked into the Swiss
you
countryside. Dust
tired,
motes dancing
but calm.
lazily in
That
golden
day,
slants of
you
evening
go to the
light.
garden and dig
You're
your
about
hands
10
into the
years
earth.
old,
No
alone,
gloves,
sitting
just
cross-legged
dirt
on
under
the wooden
nails.
floor.
A little
Around you
shadow
are little
work,
figurines you've
manual
carved
addition.
yourself,
You plant
strange ones,
tomatoes,
oddly shaped,
arrange stones,
like ancient idols
and hum
whose
something
meanings you
ancient
can't quite
name,
explain.
because the
You
truth
speak
is,
to them,
no matter how
sometimes
intellectual
silently,
it gets,
sometimes
how many
aloud.
theories,
It's
symbols,
your secret ritual.
and Greek
You've
etymologies
buried one
you
in the
invent,
garden and
it
placed a
always
tiny
comes back to
stone
this:
on top as
who
a
are
shrine.
you when no one's
You
looking,
don't know
and
why it
who,
matters,
in
but
the
it
silence,
does. You're
is
Carl
looking
Jung,
back. The shadow
and you're
doesn't
already
answer in
haunted.
words,
So,
but it
before you get
listens.
comfortable,
And sometimes
take a moment to like the
it
video and
smiles.
subscribe,
You're in your
but
study
only if you
again.
genuinely
Journal
enjoy what
open,
I do here.
ink
Let me
flowing.
know where
The
you're
lamp
watching
casts a
from,
warm
and
circle
what
of
time
light
it
as
is in your
thunder
part of
mumbles
the
beyond
world
the Alps.
now.
but
dim the
something odd
lights,
just happened.
maybe turn
and
on
you
a fan
can't
for
let
that
it go.
soft background
You were thinking
hum.
about a friend
And
you
let's
hadn't
ease into
spoken to
tonight's
in
journey
years.
together.
The
Your
phone
father
rang.
is a pastor.
It was him.
He speaks
Coincidence?
often of God.
Maybe.
But
then
with a
it
dullness
happens
that
again,
makes you
and
uneasy.
again.
You notice he
Patterns,
avoids certain
timings,
questions, big
overlaps
ones.
between dreams
You
and
suspect
reality,
he's hiding
between
doubt,
symbols
and the fear in
events.
his voice
The
makes you
scarab
want to
beetle
run in the
tapping
other
window at
direction.
just the right
You don't
moment.
yet know what
The same
theology
image showing
is,
up in three
but
separate
already you've
patient
begun
streams.
distrusting easy
The way in
answers.
the thoughts keep
School,
echoing in outer
meanwhile,
life, and
is
so
a
you
mess.
write a word in
You
your
black out
notebook,
once during a
carefully
lesson,
underlined,
collapse to the floor.
synchronicity.
Doctors call it
historical
fainting,
fact,
but
in
you
the
know
1950s.
better. Something inside of you
published
shut
his
down
essay
to avoid what you were
Synchronicity,
being
and a causal
told.
connecting
It's not
principle,
boredom, it's
proposing that
protest.
some events are
Later in
meaningfully
life,
related without
you
any
call
direct
this a creative
cause,
illness.
connected not by
At the
logic,
time,
but by
though,
significance.
it just
You
feels like
explain it
confusion
gently.
wrapped in
Synchronicity
silence.
is when the
You
psyche
spend
and the
most
world
of your
seem
youth
to be
alone,
dancing in sync.
not out of sadness,
Not because one causes
really,
the other,
more like
but
necessity.
because both are
Other
reflecting
kids are
the same
playing,
underlying
you're walking
pattern.
along the Rhine
You're
River
not
wondering
suggesting
about the
magic.
ancient
You're
Romans who
pointing
once
at
stood where you're
mystery, a quirky
standing.
tidbit.
You read Latin
worked
texts
on this
for
theory
fun.
alongside
You
none
begin
other than
journaling.
Wolfgang
At
Pauli,
night,
a
your
Nobel
dreams
Prize-winning
burst with
physicist
intensity.
who,
Gods,
while fully capable of
snakes,
quantum mechanics,
temples,
also
unfamiliar
believed his dreams
symbols.
could contain
They wake
archetypal
you up.
truths.
Sometimes you
a
cry.
psychologist.
Sometimes
Him,
you
a
scribble them
quantum
down before
wizard.
breakfast.
Somehow,
One mainstream
your
historical
paths
fact,
crossed in a
Carl
shared
Jung was
language of
born in
symbols.
1875 in
Historians still
Keswill,
argue whether
Switzerland,
synchronicity was
and
Jung's
grew up in
most
the village of
brilliant insight
Basel.
or his
His
biggest
early
slide
interest
into
in philosophy
mysticism.
and ancient
To the
history was
hard
unusually
scientists,
strong,
it's
even
fuzzy
for a
nonsense.
precocious child.
To poets
But
and
here's a
patients,
quirky tidbit.
it's a
Jung
lifeline.
believed his
A
carved
whisper from the
figurines,
cosmos saying,
particularly the
"You're
one he
not
buried
alone.
in the garden,
This moment
represented
matters.
something
And
deeply
here's the
spiritual.
thing, you're
He
not
called
trying
it
to
his
prove
mannequin,
it.
and
You're
he
offering
returned
it like
to it
a
often as a
painting.
child,
If it resonates,
whispering secrets and
good.
drawing
If
comfort
not,
from its presence.
also good.
He later
You're not building
identified
a
this as his
church.
first
You're
personal
opening a
ritual.
window. You start
Independent of
noticing
religion,
synchronicities
historians
everywhere.
still
A
argue
man
whether
dreams
these
of
early
drowning,
mystical
and the
experiences
next
were
day,
signs of a
his
fertile
basement
imagination,
floods. A woman
signs of
dreams of a
latent
white
mental
fox,
illness,
and
or
on her
flashes
walk
of
home
rare
sees
psychological
one, real,
insight.
panting,
Jung would say,
staring
why
back
not
at her
all
from the edge
three?
of the
You might
trees.
also
You
find
listen
it
to
amusing
these
that your
stories with the calm
classmates
of
thought you
someone
were a
who's
bit of a
seen enough to
weirdo,
stop
which
being
is
surprised.
understandable.
You don't
show up to
explain them
class,
away.
stare
You
at
nod.
people a little too
You
long,
say,
and
"Pay
write
attention."
poems about alchemy
That's
in your
all.
spare
You're
time.
not trying to convince
Teachers
the
didn't
world
quite
of
know
hidden
what to
strings
do
and
with you.
cosmic
One called you a
puppeteers.
dreamy
You're
boy who
trying to
wandered
remind
through
people
fog,
of their own
and yet,
stories,
you
and
begin
how
to
those
feel
stories
something
might echo louder than they think. Even the ancient texts knew this. The I Ching, which you study deeply,
Ở với lớp
offers
này sẽ
wisdom
trải
not
nghiệm những món
based
ăn
on
siêu phẩm
cause and
trên bản cho
effect,
tới ăn cơm
but on
chan nước lã
timing and
heo ớt.
resonance.
Thì chúng ta sẽ
You
có
start
cơm này,
casting coins for
với cả
insight,
nước này,
not
cả
answers,
mấy quả ớt.
insight.
Trong đó
You
từng người
explain
sẽ
that
thấm đẫm vào từng hạt
synchronicity is
cơm,
more likely
hay
to
là đi
appear
xin
when
ăn
the
nhưng bị từ
unconscious
chối.
is stirred during grief, trauma,
Không có bất cứ thứ gì ạ.
creativity, or
Cái gì cũng được.
transformation. When the
Cho em một
ego
miếng.
Rồi
softens,
đến những cú
the
lái xe
world
đường bản
seems
bị
to
ngã
speak.
SML.
Thầy đổ xe
Coincidence?
xong rồi
Maybe.
xăng vãi hết
But
cả ra
if it
đường này này.
helps someone
Tất cả
step
là đều nhờ
forward,
thằng bạn thân
it's
cắm
useful,
bữa này.
of
Thưa bác ơi,
course.
em vừa
Not
mới ngủ
everyone
dậy thì
gets
nhận
it.
được một
A
thử
man
thách
at a
của thằng bạn.
university debates notes and
Năm anh ta mới
says,
xem được một clip
"So
trên
you're
mạng
saying
thú vị
thoughts control
Bây
reality?"
giờ
You
mày
smile.
hay đi bản đá
No,
bóng hay trong
I'm
vòng
saying
24
that
giờ,
reality
giờ
might
phải chỉ được một bản
sometimes
khác nhau
rhyme with thought.
và phải
He
vào trong bản đó
frowns.
xin ăn.
You sip
Nhưng
your
với
tea.
điều kiện
Your
là món ăn
friends
hoặc
know
đồ uống
better
đó
than
phải
to
khác
roll
nhau,
their
tức là ở bản
eyes,
sau không được giống
because
bản trước.
they've seen things.
Mày check in
2.
và xin ăn ở
A
mỗi
chance
một bản thành
encounter.
công, ta sẽ
A
cho mày
perfectly timed dream. An old song
100k.
playing in a silent store right as they think of
100k.
someone long gone. You never
Ok,
say,
chốt deal.
"This is
Thì
proof."
chúng ta có
You
24 giờ đấy
just
các bác.
say,
Bây giờ đang là
"Notice,
7
and
giờ
now."
23.
You're
Đi
old
thôi các
enough
bác.
to care less
Em
about
đánh
whether
răng rửa
you're
mặt
called a
xong cái đi luôn thôi,
scientist
không cần
or a
ăn sáng,
mystic.
cơ hội kiếm tiền mà
You
các
just want people to look again at their dreams,
8 giờ
their
59 cho bác ơi.
relationships,
9 giờ em
their
đã có mặt
pain,
ở bản đầu
their
tiên.
joy,
Bản
the moments
văn
that
hóa
feel
mang sang 1. Bây giờ là chúng ta
like
nhiệm vụ
thunder
là sẽ có
about
1
to
tiếng
crack,
để đi vào đây
because
xin ăn
sometimes
và sau
the
đấy là
meaning
di chuyển sang
behind a
các bản
moment
khác. Ở
matters
trên
more
này có
than the
một
reason
chị
for it,
gái đang đang làm
And
gì không biết.
sometimes, just
Chị ơi.
sometimes, life whispers.
Nhà mình có
And
gì
you
ăn không
actually
chị?
hear it. You're sitting by the lake
Sao
now.
ăn?
The wind barely stirring the
cũng hơi
water's
nhục.
skin. You've
Vì
aged
100k mà
visibly,
thấy nhục quá.
gently. The beard's gone silver.
Nhà
The
nhà
eyes
mình
are
có gì ăn không chị?
softer, but still carry that mischievous gleam.
Không có bất
As
cứ
if
thứ gì
you're
ạ?
always mid-conversation with something invisible and
cho em một
deeply
miếng.
amused. Bowlingham stands behind you like a stone memory.
Chị bảo không
You
có.
built it without architects.
Em phải đi sang nhà khác
Just
thì
your làm đâu.
đâu.
hands and intuition.
Chị bảo không có.
No
Em đi sang
plumbing.
nhà khác không
No
ăn nhá.
phone. Just
Dữ
earth,
vậy?
fire, and sky. A
Chị gái
place to
ơi.
think. Or,
Nhà mình
more
có cái gì ăn
accurately,
tạm không cho em một
to
tí?
unthink. It's the
Cái gì cũng được,
1950s.
miễn là đồ ăn.
You're in your late 70s.
Đồ ăn thôi,
Most
cái gì cũng
people
được.
your age would be
Dạ.
slowing down,
Không
fading
có gì ăn
out.
à, cái gì cũng
But
được.
your
Rau
mind is
cỏ hay
still
là cái gì cũng
restless.
được chị.
Your
Chị gái rất là tốt
journals
bụng.
are
Thế thì
still
cho em xin một
growing.
quả nhá.
Your
Mấy quần
dreams
nào lấy?
still visit.
Đây.
You greet them
Cho em xin
like
quả này
old
cho chị nhá.
friends returning from long
Cảm ơn chị nhiều.
voyages.
Thì bây
One
giờ em sẽ ăn
mainstream
hết quả xoài
historical
xong rồi mình
fact,
sẽ đi
Carl
chơi sau.
Jung continued
Bạn hát cho anh nhé.
writing, painting, and advising
Vừa đủ chín
students
tới.
well into his 80s. His final major work, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, was published posthumously and remains one of the most beloved autobiographical texts in psychology. You spend these final years reflecting, not with melancholy, but with curiosity. You don't claim to have answers, just
Bây giờ
maps,
9 giờ 56,
symbols,
gần 10 giờ rồi.
invitations. You're
Là em
proud.
sẽ đến với
Yes,
bản thứ hai,
but
đó là
also
bản
cautious.
tên là bản
You remind
thanh
your
ngám.
readers,
Ở
I
trong
am
đây
not a
em nghĩ
guru.
là
I am not
sẽ
a
khá là khó
prophet.
đi.
I
Nhìn
am a
thấy đường
man
đất này là
trying to
tí nữa nếu mà là
describe
mưa
what
là
I've
hơi
seen in
chối
the
đấy.
dark.
Khó
Still,
ra lắm đấy các bạn.
people come to
sẽ đi
you
vào để
from all
xem
over the
cô có đồ ăn
world.
không, thấy bếp
They
nhà
sit
cô
on
vẫn
the
đang
wooden
bùng
bench
cháy kìa.
beside
Đang là
you,
có đồ ăn đấy các bạn ạ.
watching the water.
Em sẽ
They
vào
ask
hỏi thôi
about
nhé.
life, about death, about God.
Cô ơi,
You say, we're all a little fragment of
nhà
a
mình
greater
có cái gì để
mystery.
ăn được không?
You pause. And the
Cái
best
gì cũng
thing
được.
we can do
Hoa
is
quả,
listen.
bánh
A
trái gì cũng
quirky
được.
tidbit. In his later years, Jung became fascinated with flying
Quả xoài à?
dreams,
Quả xoài vừa lấy
dreams
là
where the
sao
dreamer
ăn rồi?
soars freely
Rồi có
over
quả khác không?
landscapes. He saw them as signs of
Quả gì cũng được.
individuation, of achieving a kind of inner wholeness. When
Cháu
one is
đang-
no longer
cháu đang đi
held
quay
by the
cái vlog
ground,
ấy mà.
he said. Perhaps
Có
the
mít á.
soul has
Có,
taken
có
flight.
được.
Historians
Cháu đi,
still
cho cháu một
argue
miếng.
whether Jung's final philosophy leaned
dạ,
too
dạ, cháu
far
đi
into
vào nhá.
mysticism. Did he abandon science?
Dạ vâng,
Did
ok.
he lose
Cô
the
bảo
edge
lên
of
nhà
analysis?
các bác.
But
Em
those
sẽ
who
lên nhà.
knew him, truly knew him, say he was
Vào
at
đây không
peace.
cho mấy đứa
Not
trẻ
with
con cái gì
answers,
thôi và xin
but
ăn.
with
Hơi ngại các
questions.
bạn.
You walk slow and now.
Bếp nhà cô
Your
đang
dreams are gentler, less fire, more whisper, less storm, more
Cháu xin phép quay một
twilight.
tí
You
nhé.
speak often of the self,
Cảm ơn chú.
not as something to find,
Cô
but
đang
something
ngồi ở
to become.
cửa. Cô
A
đang khâu gì
lifelong
đấy cô?
journey inward. You say,
À cái này
we
để
are
mình
not
nằm
what
túi
we
mình
appear to
đi
be.
rừng à?
We are that which
Đi rừng
dreams
đi nương
us.
nhỉ?
And
Đây
then
là cái
one
túi
night,
của
in
những người bà con
1961,
vùng cao là
the
hay
wind grows
may từ
quiet.
cái bao này gọi là
You're
bao lân hay
breathing
bao đạm cô nhỉ?
slows. Your family is near.
Đấy,
The
hiện từ
room
bao
is
đạm và bao
still.
lân.
A storm rolls gently
Cô mới cắt
beyond
ra
the
xong
lake,
cô may lại
and
thành
you let
túi các
go,
bạn. Cái
not
này thì
into
để đi
silence,
rừng
but
đi
into
nương thì bền
story.
lắm cô
The
nhỉ?
water is calm now. The tower stands still,
Chú thì đang ở
watching
bếp,
over the
bổ
lake
mít
like a
cho
sentinel
mình ăn.
carved from
Lấy thìa
time.
cho em.
Somewhere nearby, a bird calls, distant, low, and soft. The stars begin to bloom above Bowlingham, scattered and indifferent, but beautiful just the same. You take one last walk around the garden. Each stone remembers your hands, each path, your feet. There's no urgency, no questions needing answers. Just the cool night air brushing against your skin like a lullaby. Maybe you hear the voice of Philemon again, faint and feathered, whispering something you don't need to write down this time. Maybe you don't. It doesn't matter, because you've spent your life listening to symbols, to dreams, to silence. And now the silence is speaking. The night stretches on, long, gentle, heavy with meaning, not to be solved, but to be held. And so, if you're lying in bed now, eyes closed, breath slow, maybe part of you is walking those same forest paths, watching firelight flicker against stone walls, pausing by the lake where the old man once sat and spoke with the wind. You're not lost. You're unfolding, like a dream that finally understands itself. Good night, traveler of the soul.